My name is Tom Reitz.
Hi, Tom.
I am a student activist, and I am an unlikely activist.
You are a student activist. An unlikely activist. I cannot wait to hear what sets you apart from all of the rest.
I grew up in a relatively conservative suburb called Plainfield, Illinois, and I had a bit of a tumultuous upbringing. Early on, I was in the foster care system, a state-funded program for youths whose parents had problems at home. My mother, diagnosed bipolar, suffering from alcoholism, was a loving yet troubled role model for me. I am also the son of a disabled American veteran who, following the death of my mother in 2010, raised me as a single parent on a fixed income.
That does sound like a complicated upbringing, truth be told.
After high school, my father and I couldn't make ends meet, and I had to make my own way. While all of my newfound college friends were celebrating their first December break back from college, I was homeless, and I was scared.
Man, that is an absolute horror story. My condolences.
I call myself an unlikely activist because, like so many others, my journey to college was already statistically unlikely. Foster children are one of the most marginalized groups in the higher education system.
Foster children are one of the most marginalized groups in the higher education system. I'm not sure what that means exactly. How does being a foster child make you marginalized by the time you get to college? I mean, at that point, presumably, you're already an adult.
But if you add family alcoholism, single parentage, and poverty, it becomes pretty hard to believe in yourself, that you can make an impact.
Yes, I can imagine that all of those factors combined could have a negative impact on your self-image, or perspective on life. But how did all of that make you marginalized in college?
From my statements, you could be guessing that this will be a cliché talk about how I pulled myself up from my bootstraps.
Well, I confess, seeing you standing up on a stage and being so open about your hardships growing up does tend to make me think that you have managed to succeed in life despite them. Would I be wrong?
It's not. I know that I still had a leg up because of white privilege.
Oh, for Christ's sakes.
Even though I started on a bottom rung. By the end of this talk, you'll understand why that is.
Bipolar mother, alcoholic father, foster child, homeless. But somehow the impact of all of that was mitigated in your case, compared to others due to your skin color? Do enlighten me.
But my goal for this talk is for each and every one of you to feel as willing as I just was in sharing your own lived experience.
Translation. I hope that through my confession of original sin, you too will be inspired to acknowledge that which stains your own soul.
As an activist who tries to raise awareness and make an impact, my job is to reach people, even those who I disagree with. So I've found that there are 3 things we have to realize in order for us to reach people who we disagree with.
Oh boy! A list! I love lists. It makes for very clear commentary breaks.
Our story, their story, and what both of those stories mean when they're put together.
Our story, their story, and what they mean when put together. So, looking at an apple, looking at an orange, and then comparing apples and oranges. Got it.
So it sounds simple, but the first step in reaching people who we disagree with is realizing our own story. During my sophomore year, a particularly controversial speaker came to my campus. For a variety of reasons, I helped organize a demonstration outside of the event in protest.
Okay, this ought to be interesting.
The event was packed with both students and members of the general public. But when things began to wind down, only a few people remained. Some of them in arguments, others having calmer discussions. I saw it as an opportunity to engage not only those who I agreed with, but also those who I disagreed with.
That sounds entirely reasonable. How did that go?
One of these people walked up to me. For the purposes of anonymity, I will call him Tim. He was white, tall, wearing boat shoes and a blue button-up. He confronted me by asking, "Why do you think all these protesters care so much? It's not like race matters anymore. He seemed to infer from my race and gender that I, like him, agreed with this controversial speaker.
He seemed to infer, and you know who he agreed with and on what points. So, you're a mind reader. Got it.
But in that moment, I was very tired. My voice was hoarse, the day hadn't gone as I planned, and I just wasn't in a great mood. So I flat out told Tim that I thought he was wrong. And in apparent surprise to Tim that we weren't on the same side, he immediately pivoted and began reciting a carefully crafted argument for why he thought race didn't matter anymore.
Carefully crafted. So you know that Tim had this argument rehearsed beforehand. Oh, right. You're a mind reader.
Naturally, my first reaction was to do the same thing, pull my talking points off the shelf.
So then, on this point, you're really no better than Tim, in your own estimation.
And I did. But midway through my almost mechanical delivery, it dawned on me that several people and experiences I had lived through influenced me far more than any other statistic or talking point. In other words, I realized that my story was really important to why I believed what I believed, that it would probably be the same for Tim.
Your personal, anecdotal story supersedes facts and statistics. Got it.
So I shared stories with Tim. I realized my story. We started at first by talking about people who influenced us. Then I shared my story and my upbringing. And then I started to share stories of people who I had grown up with in the foster care system, whose parents had been given harsher sentences, not because of the crimes they had committed, but because of their race.
Really? Their race determined their sentencing. I would love to see these examples. I wonder if you'll provide them. Oh, you never bring them up again during the course of this entire talk. So, are we just meant to listen and believe?
I reluctantly engaged with Tim in a pretty long and personal conversation. He was defensive at first, like before. But we, at that moment, laid down our metaphorical weapons. He looked at me and he said, "I didn't know about all that. I guess that would suck."
So Tim, hearing of your personal hardships, had enough empathy for you to express his condolences. Well, that sounds very civil of him.
We, at that moment, forgot our political allegiances and had a discussion about something real. This was made possible because I made an effort to engage with and share my story with Tim.
So, save for reducing the conversation down to make it all about you, no civil discussion of differing politics could have taken place. That's an interesting theory.
So, the second step in reaching people who we disagree with is listening to their story. In working through our own story, we have to go through so many emotions: fear, anger, embarrassment, and vulnerability. But realizing your own story is really helpful in understanding why you hold certain beliefs. To take the next step, we have to listen to other stories.
Aha! So, tell us about Tim's story.
From our conversation, I learned that Tim was a part of what is officially known as the manosphere.
Oh, God.
A subculture of men who traverse internet forums focusing on subjects like pickup culture, masculinity, and men's rights. I bring up the subject because many of you might not have known that the alt-right, the political faction that has been dominating headlines because of its opposition to social justice, is just made up of people like Tim.
The alt-right, the political faction which opposes social justice, is made up of people like Tim. Okay. I wonder if our speaker considers anyone who disagrees with social justice is thus alt-right.
Tim has grown up less likely than I to perceive racism as a problem that affects Americans today. And had I not listened to him, I wouldn't have understood why.
I can't wait for this revelation.
Tim shared that he was working in a trade that might not exist in a few years, that he hadn't been able to go to college, that he was angry, and he was scared. Tim shared that he was beginning to identify with the alt-right, and because of our conversation, I think I understood why. He feels socially excluded.
So, Tim works in a dying industry and lacked the resources and/or opportunity to get into college. And Tim is, as you said, white. Got it.
Tim told me that he was far less likely than I, a college student at a liberal arts university, to personally know people from marginalized communities.
What? Tim said he was less likely to know people from marginalized communities because he wasn't attending a liberal arts college. I don't understand.
His demographic, men from the ages of 18 to 25, are less likely to have obtained a college degree. And those who don't have a college degree have a workforce participation rate that is declining faster than any other age and gender group.
Whoa, wait. I'm still stuck on the notion that the only place Tim would have expected to see non-white people is at a liberal arts college. Now you're describing the statistical fortunes, and not positive ones, that apply to Tim's circumstances. I can't deny, I am confused.
Tim told me that he was feeling socially excluded from mainstream society because of this. His demographic tends to spend more time online and away from others. But I realized that in that moment, because he was less connected, he was probably also feeling excluded from discussions surrounding race.
You know what Tim was feeling now. So, mind reader and empath. Got it.
A study from social psychologists at Princeton University linked this feeling, the perception of social exclusion, to being more willing to hold extreme and sometimes conspiratorial beliefs.
You needed a Princeton study to tell you that. Okay.
I remember feeling similarly when I was growing up, but I shifted my views later. See, I had the privilege of, because of my race and gender, of not feeling threatened by Tim's presence as a man in a chaotic environment.
Wait. Your race and gender prevented you from feeling fear. Your race and gender naturally impart upon you a certain bravery. So bravery isn't a character trait, it's determined by your chromosomes and your melanin count. Interesting theory. So a woman of a skin color different than yours would have just been naturally and helplessly fearful when facing Tim. Got it.
In fact, we were able to find a lot of common ground, a lot of things that we had lived through that were similar. You see, we had basically the same identities.
You had basically the same identities. But you're Tom, and he's Tim. You're a college student activist. He's an undereducated blue-collar worker. He was on one side of the argument at the talk you attended, and you were on the other. And so far, you haven't described a whole lot that the two of you have in common elsewise. Unless your definition of identity is based wholly on race and gender, I guess. But that can't be right. Can it?
But it was our values that had ended up drastically different from one another.
Your values were drastically different. What values are those, exactly? And does different carry with it a moral judgment?
Because I listened, I was able to understand both of our stories. That while both of our stories were very different, they were both real experiences. This is the third and final step in reaching people who we disagree with.
Reaching people. So, is your aim to converse or convert using these three steps? Because it seems like it might be the latter.
Understanding what happens when we add our stories together. The privilege that being a straight white man entails is real to me, because I've also seen privilege firsthand in the foster care system, where non-white people and those in the LGBT community go through what I did, but with vastly different outcomes.
So the foster care system is racist, sexist, and homophobic?
I met other children who were in the foster care system because their parents couldn't accept that they were gay.
So the parents were the homophobes, not the foster system. I'm getting mixed messages here.
I had parents who accepted me for who I was. Not everyone else did.
And yet you still ended up in the foster system as a straight, white male.
I knew that I was lucky, but little did I know that privilege was the term for what I was feeling.
So feeling lucky is just a reflection of one's privilege.
Tim and I clearly disagreed about several topics, but he kept asking me why he should recognize his privilege when so many other people who were white clearly had disadvantages in their life.
That is a very reasonable question. Tim's privilege wasn't getting him a college degree or securing his future employment, or making him feel like he was accepted in society. And your parents' privilege did not prevent their mental illness or addictions, and your privilege did not keep you out of foster care or from being homeless. So, yes, tell us why Tim was wrong to not acknowledge his privilege.
We unfortunately had to cut our discussion short at this point, as Tim had to leave. But I really wish I had the chance to answer his question then.
Well, now you can answer it for the rest of us. I can hardly wait.
If I had had a few more minutes with Tim, I would have asked him to add our stories together and to add other stories to his.
Would you call that intersectional storytelling?
I've realized since meeting Tim that someone else's experience of oppression can be true without contradicting his personal story.
Someone else's experience of oppression can be true without contradicting his personal story. So someone's true experience does not contradict their personal story. So if their story is true, it doesn't contradict their story. What?
This is why it's so important that we genuinely believe someone when they share their lived experience.
So, listen and believe. Okay, so by that metric, you believe Tim when he says that privilege was not evident in the course of his lived experience. Right?
Right?
This is what I wish I would have been able to share with Tim. That my experience of poverty was just as valid as my other peers' experience of racial and sexual orientation-related oppression, and valid just like Tim's experience of social exclusion.
All were valid.
See, I realized that both of our stories existed next to one another.
Right.
By adding our stories together, I've been able to realize the humbling truth that though I care about social justice and equality today, it took me a very long journey to get here, and it would probably take a long time for Tim as well.
Tim needs to undertake a long journey to arrive at a place where he cares about social justice and equality. And you humble yourself at just how long it took you to get where you are. So, would you say that you have found salvation while Tim is still in denial of his sin?
How many of you, by show of hands, have ever said something offensive?
Offense is taken, never given. Have I ever said something I intended to offend someone with? Yes. Was I always successful? I have no idea. I'm not a mind reader.
Perhaps something racist.
Something racist? You mean like when you said that being white gave you the bravery to confront Tim in a chaotic environment? That kind of racist?
You see, this is what Tim should have asked me.
So now you know better than Tim what he should have asked. why don't you just say, this is what you wish Tim had asked you? It's very odd.
Because it means that we are all on a spectrum of awareness.
We are all on a spectrum of awareness. We are all tainted with sin, some just more than others. And what defines the most sinful among us, I wonder?
I am not perfect, no matter how aware I think I am.
You're right. Forever will you be flawed. It's good that you acknowledge that. Very humble of you.
And because I was adding our stories together, I began being able to bring people like Tim with me in this journey into this uncomfortable admission.
Translation: by projecting empathy towards the plights of the heathen, I am more equipped to lead them towards revelation and salvation.
Since then, I've been able to communicate to people like Tim the real reasons why I care about social justice, why I recognize my white privilege, and why certain comments were offensive or degrading to marginalized people.
So, talking to Tim has given you the ability to moralize to others regarding the incorrect way in which they think or speak, because you are more aware of how you reached your authoritarian beliefs. Got it.
Since then, I've been able to articulate white privilege to my white family, friends, and colleagues who might not have seen things the way that I did.
I can't imagine why they wouldn't have already been seeing things your way.
By adding stories together, I've realized that we can and do have the power to reach people, but we just have to realize how to add our stories together. When we do this, we get a new story as well. If we all do this, we can help people like Tim in becoming more aware of problems facing diverse communities.
Who is we in this scenario?
And also become better equipped ourselves to reach those who we disagree with. See, I firmly believe that if we realize these three ideas, it can work. But we shouldn't expect it to always work. I've been called a social justice warrior and a liberal snowflake too many times to think that it will.
Well, you proselytize social justice and classify yourself as an unlikely, i.e., special, activist who promotes a far-left political ideology. Ad hominem labels aren't good arguments, but they might indeed be accurate descriptors.
What we should try is to plant seeds, stories that will one day perhaps inform someone's beliefs. If we realize these three ideas, our story, their story, and our stories put together, we can find the power to reach people.
The power to reach people. Got it.
But we have to take it to heart, to connect through our lived experiences. If we do, the radicalization of people like Tim and trends like the alt-right can be reversed.
Tim had been radicalized? A guy willing to have a heart-to-heart conversation with someone from an opposing viewpoint and who expressed empathy at your personal hardships is a radical. Wow.
But we must remember that this will take far more than just carefully crafted arguments. We have to figure out how to reach people, how to share what we've gone through and what we know to be real. Thank you.
What we know to be real. So, in order to convert, I mean reach people, we have to testify as to the hardships we have experienced, and then listen to their hardships, and then combine our experiences to show them that, really, we are all of one faith, I mean spectrum. And through this sharing, might we lead them to see what we know to be real, that they are the beneficiaries of privilege, that their very existence is a blight upon all those who do not look like them. Only then might they learn to be humble and see their hardships for what they truly are, not burdens, but mere trifles as compared to those unlike us. Because our skin, our gender, our sexuality provides us a kind of bravery that they just do not have. And we, all of us, need to acknowledge that. As always, thank you for watching.